Your landlord just stopped paying the mortgage, the bank is coming, and you might lose your apartment even though you've done nothing wrong. This is happening right now to thousands of New York tenants, and it could happen to you next. Right now, over 2,000 rent-stabilized apartments in New York City are in danger of foreclosure. Not because tenants stopped paying rent, not because buildings are abandoned, but because landlords can't afford to keep them anymore. And most tenants living in these buildings have no idea what's coming. In 2024, New York passed some of the strongest tenant protection laws in the country: the Good Cause Eviction Law, new rent increase limits, stronger protections against unfair evictions. These laws were supposed to help tenants. They were supposed to make housing more affordable. But something went wrong, something nobody predicted. Those same laws are now threatening to destroy the very apartments they were meant to protect. Buildings are falling into foreclosure. Landlords are walking away. Banks are refusing to take ownership. And thousands of tenants are caught in the middle. This isn't fear-mongering. This is happening right now. And unless you understand what's going on, you could be the next victim. The 2019 law that changed everything. To understand what's happening, we need to go back to June 2019. That's when New York passed the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act. Everyone called it HSTPA. It was the biggest change to New York's rent laws in 50 years. The law did several things. It banned landlords from raising rents by up to 20% when a tenant moved out. It capped rent increases after apartment improvements at just 2%, and it made rent stabilization permanent. Once an apartment was rent stabilized, it could never be deregulated, no matter how high the rent went. Tenant advocates cheered. They called it a historic victory. Finally, affordable housing would be preserved. But there was a problem nobody wanted to talk about. The law made it nearly impossible for landlords to make money on rent-stabilized buildings. Before 2019, landlords had a business model. If a unit reached $2,774 per month and became vacant, they could take it out of rent stabilization. They could also deregulate apartments if major renovations pushed the rent above that threshold. Lenders understood this model. They loaned hundreds of millions of dollars to landlords based on this plan: buy a rent-stabilized building, wait for apartments to turn over, renovate them, raise the rents. Eventually, enough units would deregulate and the building would become profitable. After 2019, that path disappeared overnight. Thousands of loans were underwritten under the premise that certain units would be deregulated. Now landlords can't pay back those loans under the original terms. Jay Martin from the New York Apartment Association explained it clearly. As they become mature, and we're out of the 5 years post-2019, we're starting to see that, and that is part of what is leading to the foreclosure crisis. 6 years later, those loans are coming due, and landlords can't pay them back. The foreclosure numbers are terrifying. Let me show you the numbers. In 2022, 176 rent-stabilized apartment units in New York City were foreclosed on. In 2023, that number doubled. In 2024, it doubled again. As of April 2025, over 2,000 rent-stabilized units are in danger of defaulting on their mortgages. That's according to the Rent Guidelines Board itself. The Rent Guidelines Board estimates that 10% of rent-stabilized units lose money for their landlords. That's 64,314 units. This number has doubled since 2019. Think about that. 10% of rent-stabilized apartments in New York City lose money every single month. The landlord pays more in costs than they collect in rent. They're bleeding cash. And property values have collapsed. In Manhattan, the median price per unit dropped from $290,000 to $122,000. That's a loss of 58%. If you own a building worth $10 million in 2019, it might be worth $4 million today. You've lost $6 million in value. Even at these rock-bottom prices, investors aren't buying because the math doesn't work. Operating costs keep rising, property taxes go up, insurance costs skyrocket, water and sewer rates increase, but rent increases are capped at 3 to 4.5% per year. When banks refuse to take the keys. In March 2025, something shocking happened. Santander Bank foreclosed on a rent-stabilized building in Harlem. They won the foreclosure case in court. The building was legally theirs, but they refused to take the keys. Think about that for a moment. A bank foreclosed on a property but didn't want it, because owning a rentes. Stabilized building in New York City is a guaranteed money loser. This is unprecedented. Banks always take foreclosed properties. But now banks are realizing these buildings are worthless to them. They can't raise the rents, they can't sell the properties. They're stuck with buildings that lose money every month. Some experts warn we're heading toward a repeat of the 1970s. Back then, landlords simply abandoned their buildings. They walked away and left them to decay. Entire neighborhoods fell apart. The South Bronx became a symbol of urban decay. Sarah Salzberg from Bohemia Realty Group said it bluntly, "It's a bloodbath." She explained that owners are underwater. They're losing money on every rent-stabilized unit, so they leave apartments empty rather than rent them out, or they just walk away entirely. The rent increases hitting right now. On October 1st, 2025, new rent increases took effect for over 1 million rent-stabilized apartments in New York City. That's 41% of all rental units in the city. For a one-year lease, landlords can raise your rent by 3%. For a two-year lease, they can raise it by 4.5%. Now 3% might not sound like much, but let's do the math. Say you pay $2,000 per month for rent. A 3% increase means you now pay $2,060 per month. That's an extra $60 per month, $720 more per year. If you're on a two-year lease with a 4.5% increase, your $2,000 rent becomes $2,090, an extra $90 per month, $1,080 more per year. And here's the scary part. Your income probably didn't go up to match. According to the Rent Guidelines Board, inflation-adjusted earnings for New Yorkers are down by 0.4%. That means the median rent-stabilized household is earning $240 less per year in real terms. So your income went down, but your rent went up. You're falling further behind every single month. Who this really affects? Low-income New Yorkers are hit the hardest. 37% of households earning under 50% of area median income live in rent-regulated apartments. That's 434,300 households, almost 3 times as many as those living in public housing and subsidized rentals combined. Latino and Black New Yorkers rely on rent regulation more than any other group. These are nurses, bus drivers, home health aides, retail workers, people who keep the city running. 43% of rent-regulated renters were born in New York City. 41% are immigrants, most commonly from the Dominican Republic, Mexico, and China. These are people who have lived in their apartments for decades. They raised their families there. They built their lives there. Personal bankruptcy filings jumped nearly 14% for New York City residents in 2024. That's the second straight year filings have increased. Cash assistance cases rose for the 5th consecutive year. They now exceed 500,000 households. That's a 66% increase from 2019. Emergency grants for rent arrears hit their highest level since the 2008 financial crisis. 135,470 households needed emergency help paying rent in 2024. The Good Cause Eviction Law. Now let's talk about the Good Cause Eviction Law. This took effect on April 20, 2024. On paper, it sounds great. Landlords can't evict tenants without a good reason. They can't refuse to renew your lease just because the lease expired. The law also limits rent increases. If your landlord tries to raise your rent by more than 10% or by more than 5% plus the Consumer Price Index, that's considered unreasonable. You can challenge it in court. But here's what the law doesn't tell you. The Good Cause Eviction Law only applies in certain places. It's mandatory in New York City, but outside the city, municipalities have to opt in. As of April 2025, only 17 towns and cities across New York State have adopted it. That means most of the state isn't covered. And even in New York City, there are major exceptions. The law doesn't apply if your landlord owns 10 or fewer units in New York State. If your apartment was built after 2009, you're not covered. If your rent is above 245% of the fair market rent, you're not covered. For a one-bedroom apartment in New York City, that threshold is $6,004 per month. If you pay more than that, the Good Cause Eviction Law doesn't protect you. So who does this law actually cover? Fewer people than you think. What happens when your building goes into foreclosure? Let's talk about what happens to you, the tenant, if your building goes into foreclosure. First, understand something important. Tenant, when a building goes into foreclosure, you don't automatically lose your apartment. Your lease is still valid. Your rent stays the same. You still have tenant rights. But your life is about to get much harder. The landlord stops caring about the building. They're losing it anyway. Why should they fix anything? Repairs stop happening. Heat might not work in winter. Hot water becomes unreliable. Leaks don't get fixed. Pests multiply. Common areas fall apart. You call the landlord, nobody answers. You send emails, nobody responds. You're living in a building that's slowly falling apart, and there's nothing you can do about it. Take Kara Portof. She lives in a rent-stabilized one-bedroom on East 12th Street in Manhattan. She pays $2,200 per month. Her landlord is Madison Capital Realty. According to court records, they stopped making mortgage payments in January 2024. The Community Preservation Corporation filed foreclosure papers. Portof said it clearly, "I have to pay rent on time and they are not upholding their part of the bargain." She's paying her rent every month, on time, but the building is falling apart. This is the nightmare scenario. You're a good tenant, you pay your rent, you follow the rules. But your apartment is becoming unlivable because your landlord is drowning in debt. The political battle over your rent. Right now, New York has a new mayor. Zoran Mamdani won the election in November 2025 on a promise to freeze rents. He pledged to freeze rent for all 4 years of his administration. He won more votes than any New York City mayor in 60 years. According to an April 2025 poll, 78% of likely New York City voters support a rent freeze. That includes 83% of Democrats and 63% of Republicans. But there's a problem. A rent freeze might make the crisis worse. Since 2020, expenses for rent-stabilized apartments have grown 22%, but rents only grew roughly 11%. Rising costs for utilities, insurance, and labor without a corresponding rise in revenue may lead buildings to deteriorate. Mayor Adams, who was still in office during the 2025 rent vote, said it clearly. Gas doesn't freeze, electricity doesn't freeze, insurance doesn't freeze. The cost of running a building doesn't freeze. If Mayor Mamdani implements a rent freeze from October 2026 through September 2030, tenants could collectively save $2.44 billion to $6.84 billion. But landlords warn that more buildings will fall into foreclosure. More apartments will be lost. The real estate lobby wants to roll back parts of the 2019 law. They want higher rent increase caps. They want more flexibility for apartment improvements. Tenant advocates refuse. They say any changes will hurt renters. Meanwhile, progressive groups want the state to create a social housing development authority. When buildings go into foreclosure, the state could buy them and turn them into permanently affordable housing. But it would cost billions of dollars, and it's not clear where that money would come from. The new law taking effect January 2026. Starting January 1, 2026, a new law takes effect. It's called the Rent Transparency Act. The law requires landlords to more clearly publicize rent-stabilized units in their buildings. A sign must be posted in building common areas in both English and Spanish. Landlords must explain how prospective tenants can access information about whether units are rent-stabilized. The law aims to prevent rent overcharges. Many landlords don't consistently comply with registration requirements. This makes it difficult for tenants to determine if their apartments are stabilized or if landlords are overcharging them. By law, apartments are generally considered rent-stabilized if they're located in buildings constructed before 1974 with 6 or more rental units, or if owners receive tax incentives in exchange for keeping rents affordable. But many tenants don't know if their apartment is rent-stabilized, and some landlords take advantage of that confusion to charge more than they're legally allowed. Starting in 2026, that should become harder, but enforcement remains a question. Warning signs your building is in trouble. If you're a tenant in New York, watch for these warning signs. Your landlord stops making repairs. Small problems pile up. Requests go unanswered for weeks or months. The building looks run down, common areas are dirty, nobody cleans anymore, the hallways need paint, the front door doesn't lock properly. Your super or building staff disappear, or they tell you the landlord isn't paying them on time. This is a huge red flag. If the landlord can't pay staff, they're in serious financial trouble. You see city violations posted on the building, especially fire code violations or structural problems. If violations don't get fixed, the building could be condemned. Your landlord asks you to move out or offers you cash to break your lease. They might say they want to do renovations. Be suspicious. They might be trying to empty the building before foreclosure. The building management company changes multiple times in a short period. Stable buildings don't change management constantly. You receive notices about foreclosure proceedings, or you see legal notices posted in the building. Read those notices. They'll tell you what's happening. Your rent checks start bouncing, or the landlord stops cashing them for long periods. These are signs that the landlord's bank account is frozen or overdrawn. If you see any of these signs, take action immediately. Don't wait. The sooner you know there's a problem, the more options you have. Your rights and how to protect yourself. You have rights as a tenant in New York. Know them, use them. If you're in a rent-stabilized apartment, you have the right to a renewal lease. Your landlord must offer you a new lease at the rent increase set by the Rent Guidelines Board. If your landlord tries to refuse your renewal, that's illegal. Contact the Office of Rent Administration immediately. File a complaint. If you think your rent is too high, request your rent history. Go to the New York State Division of Housing and Community Renewal website. Fill out the rent history request form. They'll send you your rent history by mail. This shows every rent increase for the past 4 years. If you find you're being overcharged, file a rent overcharge complaint. The state will investigate. If you were overcharged, your landlord has to refund you. In some cases, you might be owed thousands of dollars. Document everything. Keep copies of all correspondence with your landlord, every email, every letter, every text message. Take photos and videos of problems in your apartment. Save your rent receipts. Keep your lease and all renewal offers. If you're facing eviction, get a lawyer. In New York City, tenants facing eviction in housing court have the right to free legal representation. Visit lawhelp.org for a list of providers. Don't face this alone. Join or form a tenant association in your building. Talk to your neighbors. Find out if they're experiencing the same problems. Collectively, you're much stronger than individually. The system is breaking down. Here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. The current system is broken. It doesn't work for tenants. It doesn't work for landlords. It doesn't work for anyone. Tenants need affordable housing. In a city where the median rent in Manhattan tops $5,400 per month, people need rent-regulated apartments just to survive. But landlords need to cover their costs. If buildings lose money every month, they will eventually fail. Nobody can operate a business at a permanent loss. The 2019 law tried to protect tenants by limiting rent increases, but it went too far. It created a system where tens of thousands of apartments are losing money, where buildings are falling into foreclosure. We need a new approach, one that protects tenants from unfair rent increases while allowing landlords to maintain their buildings. One that encourages the creation of new affordable housing instead of destroying what already exists. But that conversation isn't happening. Both sides dig in, each blames the other, and the crisis gets worse. What comes next? We're at a turning point. The decisions made in the next few years will determine the future of housing in New York City. Will thousands more apartments go into foreclosure? Will banks walk away from buildings they don't want? Will we see a repeat of the 1970s with abandoned buildings and displaced tenants? Or will lawmakers find a solution? Will they adjust the rent laws to make the system sustainable? Right now, nobody knows. What we do know is this. Over 2,000 rent-stabilized apartments are in danger right now. That number will grow. Every month, more buildings fall behind on their mortgages. Buildings will fail. Tenants will suffer. Mayor Mamdani faces enormous challenges. He won on a promise of a rent freeze, but he also needs to prevent buildings from falling into foreclosure. He needs to balance protecting tenants with keeping the housing stock viable. He's calling for 200,000 new affordable homes. But developers say they can't cover their costs. Enterprise Community Partners and National Equity Fund said in a recent report that the trends of increasing costs and reduced income are unsustainable for affordable housing. The city faces a $6.5 billion budget gap in 2027. Finding money for housing programs will be difficult. What you need to do now? If you're renting in New York, this affects you. Even if your building isn't in trouble today, the crisis is spreading. The housing market is getting tighter. Rents are rising, options are shrinking. You need to stay informed, know your rights, watch for warning signs, check. Your building's status every few months. Look for signs of financial distress. Take action early when you see problems. Document everything, file complaints, contact tenant organizations, get legal help, organize with your neighbors. Because the system that was supposed to protect you is breaking down, the laws that were meant to help you are creating unintended consequences, and the safety net you counted on might not be there when you need it. This isn't a problem that will fix itself. It will get worse before it gets better. The foreclosure wave is just beginning. The property value collapse is ongoing, more buildings will fail, more tenants will be displaced. The rent crisis in New York isn't coming, it's already here. It's happening right now, and it's just getting started. Stay vigilant, stay informed, know your rights. Because in the battle for affordable housing in New York, knowledge is your best defense. What you don't know can hurt you, and what you do know might save you. The future of New York housing hangs in the balance. Your home might depend on what happens next. Pay attention, because your apartment, your neighborhood, and your future are all at stake. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel for more updates.